USAF pilots reported that the performance of the MiG-15 was superior to all United Nations aircraft, including the USAF's newest plane, the F-86 Sabre. The success of the operation is disputable since no communist pilot defected before the armistice was signed on July 27, 1953. USAF pilots reported hearing Russian spoken over the radio communications channels used by the MiG-15s. Prior to the November 1950 sighting of the MiG-15s by USAF pilots, Soviet MiG-15 regiments was stationed at the Moscow Air Defense District to protect the capital against a possible NATO bombing. Some UN prisoners of war reported talking to Soviet pilots while in captivity in North Korea. According to General Mark Clark, the commanding general of the UN command had enough intelligence to claim that the Soviets were covertly lending their pilots in support of North Korean forces. According to Eltino Shock, by February 1951, some half-dozen Russian Air Force pilots visited North Korean pilots at their Northeast China Air Base at Jilin. These plainclothes officers were there to investigate the ability of the North Korean pilots and determine if they were capable enough to fly the new MiG-15. 1 month later, these same Russian pilots entered combat on behalf of North Korea, though internationally their involvement was never announced. By the end of the war, the Russians had provided half the aircraft and 5,000 pilots in support of the communist effort against the UN. Speculation exists about the origin of Operation Moolah. According to then-Captain Alan Abner, the idea of the operation originated from his office at the Army's Psychological Warfare Branch, in Washington, D.C. According to intelligence reports they received, dissatisfaction within the Soviet Air Force, even to the extent of some desertions by disgruntled pilots, led to the belief that possible future defections by some pilots was promising. Their plan set forth an offer of $100,000 for a Soviet MiG-15 and political asylum for the pilot. The plan offered $50,000 to any pilot who flew a fully mission-capable MiG-15 to South Korea. The defection of the pilot would be articulated to the global audience that the pilot fled from the perils of communism and a totalitarian regime for freedom in South Korea. The operation would also create North Korean and Chinese trepidation and mistrust of their pilots. Clark stated, "To all brave pilots who wish to free themselves from the communist yoke and start a new, better life with proper honor, you are guaranteed refuge, protection, humane care and attention. If pilots so desire, their names will be kept secret forever." Though weather may have been a factor, he opines that the leaflets had a direct effect and believes that senior communist military leaders began to screen for politically unreliable pilots. According to Lieutenant Noam Shock, the North Korean pilot who defected after the Korean War was over, his vice battalion commander, Captain Kim Young-sup, was summoned to Siniju, the North Korean Air Force headquarters in early May 1953 for 1 week. Coincidentally, with the death of Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin on March 5, 1953 and the significant loss of Russian aircraft, the Soviet Union grounded and recalled their pilots from the Korean theater. Russian pilots were taught Mandarin in order to deceive UN pilots. USAF pilots noted after the 27th, they had not heard any Russian chatter on the intercoms of MiG-15s from the Soviet Union's honchos pilots. USAF pilots noticed that communist pilots who observed USAF aircraft flying near their airspace prior to any engagement, bailed from their aircraft to ensure their personal survival. General Clark received reports of the poor quality of communist pilots after the leaflet drops of Operation Moolah, their worst piloting of the war. Communist pilots flew fewer sorties in the 90 days after Operation Moolah than in the 90 days before the first leaflet drop. UN pilots shot down 155 MiG-15s to 3 F-86 aircraft in that period. There is some evidence to believe that the Soviet Union feared a defection from its pilots more than the Chinese or North Korean regimes. According to No, the reward would not have motivated any North Korean pilots to defect, for a number of reasons. Secondly, even if the USAF had dropped leaflets in Manchuria, a North Korean pilot would not have trusted the authenticity of the offer. Nor were North Korean pilots generally aware of the purchasing power of the American dollar. Major Yeager later stated, "Flying the MiG-15 is the most demanding situation I have ever faced. It's a quirky airplane that has killed a lot of its pilots. The Kuomintang, Chinese nationalists, dropped leaflets over mainland China, offering 1,000 to 4,000 ounces of gold to communist Chinese pilots who defected to Taiwan. The more modern the aircraft, the more ounces of gold that the defecting pilot would receive. Other goals of this operation were also to acquire intelligence, force the government of North Vietnam to evaluate the loyalty of its pilots and reduce MiG sorties. Operation Diamond, a Mossad covert operation, was similar to Operation Fast Buck. An Iraqi MiG-21 pilot successfully defected and the captured MiG was evaluated by the Israeli Air Force, USAF, and the US Navy.